What we're going to do today is talk about a few things. First of all, what we accomplished in the 2019 session, where we're going from here over the next, I think, 277 days?
277 days until the legislature starts again.
Yeah, he always
We
knows.
had an hour, we have an hour count if you want it. It was 6,000, never mind, I'll stop.
Just spare us, please. And then what we need from you between now and when the session starts on January 22nd, 2020.
But first things first, we want to get a little participation from you. So if you open your app, hopefully everybody has downloaded the conference app. Open the app, and just on the front page of the app, you're going to see question number 1. So pull it up. Question number 1 is, what do the Jazz need?
Uh-oh, people are already weighing in.
This question was written with a bunch of bitterness last night. So the first thing, do we need Kyle Whittingham's calves? I mean, we can always use more of Kyle Whittingham's calves, am I right? Okay, see, that joke fell flat with my staff too.
Yeah, that didn't work.
But just Google it. You won't be disappointed. Do we need a point guard who can shoot? Right? Did anybody else cringe when Ricky Rubio shot that three-pointer? And I just told a staff member with whom I was watching the game, like, Ricky cannot take a shot on this possession. And then sure enough, he airmailed it to Mexico. The third, to clone Donovan Mitchell. And what I really wanted to write here, shout out to O-Town there in the back, is I just want Damian Lillard. Can you guys make that happen? So pull some strings, please. And then the fourth thing is we just need Jimmer. Right? Provo, we just need Jimmer. No, don't clap for that. That one pained me to write too. But I am relieved to see that, wow, actually I'm disappointed by Kyle, because we always need more Kyle in our lives. But yeah, to clone Donovan Mitchell, I agree. I think that's ultimately what the Jazz need to get over the hump.
So the most unlikely thing is what we need.
It's 2019.
Okay.
I mean, this could happen. Perfect. All right, so that's the first question, get you warmed up. We'll be asking some additional survey questions here as we continue through the presentation. Here's a question, though. It's not in the app, but I want you to think about it. Why are you here? Why are you a mayor? Why are you a council member? Why are you a city clerk? Why are you a city recorder? Why are you a city manager? Why are you a city attorney? And what attracts you to local government? Why does local government exist? You hire us, and we are grateful and frankly honored to represent you at the Capitol. We are there to preserve and promote local authority. But what does local authority really mean? What does it mean for you to be able to govern? We all have heard the statement, government closest to the people governs best, but what does that really mean? Here's an example to try to illustrate it. How many of you, by show of hands, have a recreation center in your city that the city owns and operates? Okay, so keep your hands up, okay. How many of you do not? Now raise your hands, look around. Okay, you see it's actually fairly evenly split, maybe a third to 40% do and 60+% don't. Here's the question about local authority. Should you be able to make the decision based on the feedback from your residents whether or not to build a rec center? And should you be able to make that decision one way or the other without interference from the state government or the federal government saying, no, you have to do it this way, or no, you can't do it unless you have these conditions? When we talk about local authority, really what we're saying is that you as local elected officials need to have the authority to be responsive to your citizens and make decisions that are in the best interest of your citizens, to promote quality of life, to ensure economic development, to meet the needs of your residents today as well as the residents tomorrow. And there's a role for every level of government. There's a role for cities, there's a role for counties, there's a role for the state, there's a role for federal government. But there are just traditional responsibilities that you have to pass ordinances for the health, safety, and welfare of your constituents. And that's going to vary depending on what community you're in, as we just saw with the rec center example. Some of you, that's a major priority. Others, it's like, no, it's not really my priority. But I want my neighboring city to be able to make that decision if that's what's in the best interest of their residents. So you'll see we've crossed out the term local control. This is the traditional term for what local government does. And over the last year or so, the board of directors has really done a deep dive into this term, because often the focus in this term is on the word control, that cities are trying to control people. And that's really not what we do. In actuality, what you do is work. Cities are working to provide services. You are working to provide infrastructure. You're working to promote quality of life. So in fact, I've taken my lanyard off, but everyone should have a lanyard that says #CitiesWork. You're going to see more and more of that in the months and years to come as we profile the good things that cities are doing to make a difference under that #CitiesWork.
So how did we do this session? You'll see up here.
I think we did well.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, moving on. So total tracked bills this year, 362. And underneath there, you'll see the graphic that shows how we actually track bills, how we prioritize them.
Can we talk about all of them?
All 362?
Yeah.
How many people do you want to stay
Yeah.
sitting in this room? Yeah, we're not going to do that. Don't worry. Calm down. Okay, so of those 362 bills, we had 17 really high priority bills this year, the hot bills. And I'm very pleased to report that every single one of those met our desired outcome, whether or not that was pass or fail. 17 out of 17 met our desired outcome this year. Of those bills, 26 were categorized as work, and those are the bills that we are rewriting, we're pushing on, we're gathering a coalition to either oppose or support. 25 of those bills met our desired outcome. And then of our 27 opposed bills this year, 24 of those bills failed. So I think we did pretty well. Mm-hmm. And that is really a testament to the power of the collective in this room. So I think you guys should all give yourselves a little round of applause here. And the Des News agreed with me. That doesn't happen all the time, but in this case they did. So you'll see this headline from an article that was published about a couple days after the session, where Cameron was extensively interviewed as well. And this kind of sums it up. So from gravel pits to anti-idling laws, local control saw multiple wins this year in the legislature. So good job to our team. We have an amazing team, and again, the power really is in the collective here, and it matters that you reach out to your legislators and tell them what's going on in your city so they truly understand that they're not making decisions on the Hill in a vacuum that affect you without knowing what those effects really are. So thank you. On that note, I want you to take out your phone again and go to question number 2 in the app. How often did you engage with your legislators this year? Ooh, lots of responses to that already. Almost daily. Once a week or so, pretty good. Once or twice, not bad. I don't bother because my legislators are nuts. That could be a sentiment for some of you, I'm not sure.
And we know who you are, by the way, because you guys tell us that your legislators are nuts and then tell us to go talk to them. So we know who you are. Yeah.
It's part of the job hazards.
Yeah.
And then never, I just freeloaded off of somebody else who probably talked to my legislator, I hope. So 44% reached out once or twice, 45.
And then where's the hourly, or like by minute? Right?
I'm sure there are a couple here, and we appreciate that too.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Pike. Thank you others who are in the hourly category.
Hourly category. So not bad. 46% reached out once or twice, so that's great. I'm glad that the never category isn't bigger. So thank you for that. So we want to take some time to focus in on some of the action items from this session and try to really just focus on what's important for you to know from this session. So your action items that we're going to talk about today are under the categories of housing, water, and referendum. And then, of course, we want to remind you to check the quick guide that we publish each year, and then the full wrap-up that should be out, hopefully, fingers crossed, by tomorrow. So first, let's talk about housing. SB 34 was the Affordable Housing Modifications Bill this year, and I'm sure most of you in this room have heard us talk about this, and many of you in this room have been deeply engaged in that bill. And this bill stemmed out of the Commission on Housing Affordability, which formed last session under HB 430. We, as the League, had 2 appointments on that commission. It was a 21-member commission. Andrew Johnston, council member from Salt Lake City, was one of our appointments on the commission. And then Chris Condi, council member from Lehigh, one of the fastest growing cities in the state, also sitting on that commission. So a really diverse, a good range of experience and expertise on that commission. And the bill really is about planning for population growth, which is something that most of us are facing around the state. Planning for population growth includes both transportation and housing, both true low-income housing and just the affordability of housing across the board. So SB 34 builds off two of the bills that we worked hard on in the 2018 session, HB 259, the Moderate Income Housing Amendments, and SB 136, the Transportation Governance Amendments.
And Rachel, can I add that SB 136 was the bill that Mayor Pike was referencing that Mayor Taylor spoke to in his last public address, was urging the league to support SB 136.
That's right, I remember that well. I was lucky to be there and hear the impassioned speech there. So SB 136 started integrating the state transportation planning and infrastructure with local land use planning and economic development. So SB 34 takes those to the next level. And why? Why? Because cities are already planning for population growth. They're already planning for housing at a range of income levels across the state. And we made a commitment last year to be very proactive on this issue. So we took control of what the commission was doing last year. We generated these ideas that would make their way into legislation. So what do you need to do? All cities under SB 34 need to review and update the transportation and land use elements of your general plan. Now, there's no time frame for doing this, but there are some new requirements in the code about really looking at that nexus between transportation and housing and other access to opportunity. So you'll notice that, and when you're reviewing your general plan, make sure that you're taking those things into account. Now, one of the things we did in HB 259 in 2018 was we narrowed the scope of cities that need to comply with the moderate income housing reporting requirements. So only cities of more than 5,000 in urban areas and 10,000 elsewhere have to actually file an annual report on their moderate income housing elements.
And previously it was any city above 1,000. So we were really trying to reduce that burden on the communities that are smaller than 5,000 in urban areas and smaller than 10,000 around the state.
Yeah, so in keeping with that, in SB 34, what we've done is we've added these strategies that cities are using that was generated by our legislative policy committee, strategies that are being put to use across the state, and those are now essentially a menu of options that the cities that annually report on the moderate income housing element will choose 3 or 4 of, depending on your access to transportation and how transit works in your city, 3 or 4 of those items to report on each year. That reporting cycle will start in December of 2020. So we are now working very diligently with WFRC, with MAG, with the other MPOs on tools and training on how to help you all implement SB 34. We're also working closely with the Department of Workforce Services on streamlining that annual report so that it's not as burdensome and that it will be very clear what you have to do, what you need to report on. So we're working with DWS now. They should be putting that out to rule for comment on how the reporting is going to look and work within the next couple of weeks.
One critical piece of this is that our primary message last year, based on the feedback you gave us at this conference a year ago and throughout the years, that there is no one size fits all. In fact, one size misfits all. So you heard Rachel reference the 23 different menu items, and a city can pick 3 or a city can pick 4. Well, those menu items are going to be different if you are South Jordan, or if you're Nibley, or if you're Nephi, or if you're Provo. So you figure out which ones make the most sense for your community. And Rachel mentioned that we're working with our good friends at Wasatch Front Regional Council, who are here and back there, Mountain Land Association of Governments and others, to make sure you have the tools so you know, okay, which of these housing strategies makes the most sense in Tooele versus Riverdale. And then you make those decisions, and we've still preserved that local authority that I was referencing earlier.
And we should mention that one of the things that we did this year also to further drive home that nexus between transportation and planning is to require that cities are current on the moderate income housing plan and report to be eligible for Transportation Investment Fund dollars. So you'll remember during the session, we were under quite a bit of pressure and dare I say threats. Could I say threats?
Yes, you can say threats.
Okay, I'll say threats. We were under threat from some in the development community and some in the business community who wanted to, instead of incentivizing cities by making the connection between the TIF fund eligibility, wanted to instead withhold B&C road money from you if you did not have an annual report. So we successfully fended those attacks off, and now the incentive in the bill remains. So we'll be working hard with you over this year to ensure that you have the tools you need to comply with those new requirements.
And a lot of credit goes to the co-chairs of the Commission on Housing Affordability. Senator Jake Andrick, who's down here at the conference, so if you see him, make sure to thank him for finding a good balance and sticking up for local government. Representative Val Potter, who's a former mayor of North Logan, as well as Representative Joel Briscoe from Salt Lake. And over and over and over again, those three would say in meetings, cities don't build housing, cities plan for housing. This bill is to help improve that planning. So, great efforts by those three.
For sure. I think it's also worth pointing out that this approach to planning for residential development has got national attention. Now, many of you, I'm sure, know that housing affordability and the lack of true affordable housing is a huge problem across the country. Utah isn't the only one who's dealing with this issue. But we are getting accolades nationwide for using this bottom-up approach. So this is, the top two there are from national magazines. One was Governing Magazine, and then City Labs, which is a planning magazine, really commending us for, here's how a red state can do this. Maintain local control and pick and choose the strategies that work for them to incorporate into their communities.
We were really pleased by that national coverage, but we were also proactive in our communication efforts during the session to explain what you are already doing on the ground to plan for population growth. All too often there's a narrative at the Capitol that cities are obstacles to progress, and we reject that narrative. And so part of our pushback included social media videos, included submissions by league board members and just league members in general to Utah Policy. So for example, there are a couple headlines here from Utah Policy. One is Cedar Hills to Salt Lake City. Communities of all sizes make planning for growth a top priority. That was an op-ed that was submitted by Councilmember Aaron Mendenhall from Salt Lake, who's on our board, and Mayor Jenny Reese from Cedar Hills. I'm going to go out on a limb and say politically Salt Lake City and Cedar Hills are different. Is that fair? Okay, Mayor Reese is agreeing with me.
Councilmember Mendenhall just shrugged.
She shrugged. Okay, well, maybe not. But anyway, the point is they're different communities, yet both of them are being proactive in preparing for population growth in different ways, and that was the crux of that Utah Policy submission. Meanwhile, this submission, Pride and Progress Spanish Fork, addresses community growth. This was submitted by our first Vice President, Mike Mendenhall, who always threatens to pull Spanish Fork's dues whenever I mispronounce it. But he submitted this to talk about how in their city, they're proactively planning for growth and planning for future transportation. For example, in Spanish Fork, they're planning for a front-runner station that is still years away, and the city is already now proactively planning for the growth in that area. Even though it's still years away from fruition, they are progressively and proactively planning for that spot. And we wanted to make sure that legislators heard that message. So we had multiple Utah Policy columns. You're going to see more of that in the months to come. And then we did a communications campaign during the session with videos with many of you explaining what your cities are already doing. So here's one.
As one of the fastest growing communities in the state over the last 5 years, Vineyard has exploded from 400 residents in 2014 to nearly 15,000 residents. So planning has been a major focus of ours. We've updated our general plan to include a housing plan that identifies areas in our city that are compatible with a mix of housing types. We have a planned urban development that maximizes affordable housing for residential living with a mix of commercial, office, and recreational space within walking distance of our public transportation.
Thank you to Mayor Fulmer from Vineyard, who is right on the front lines of population growth. And every city has a slightly different story to tell, which is why we did 59 videos during the course of the legislative session. So remember, it's a 46-day session, so we were doing more than one video a day. And in our internal analytics, they were watched for a combined more than 58 hours, and videos were less than 1 minute long. So we were able to get really good traction both at the Capitol and with the general public. So with that being said, pull back out your phones. Question number 3. Did you see our communications efforts this session? Check all that applies. So we have the Friday Facts email. We have the daily email that Rachel sent out dutifully, sometimes even by midnight during the session.
Almost always.
Almost always
Yeah.
by midnight. Daily social media videos, the Utah policy columns and the Trib op-ed, the Cities Work podcast, which Rachel and I started during the session, which teaser, we'll be rebooting that podcast after this week. We're doing several podcast interviews during the conference. And then LPC, either in person or webcast, or you just saw the hashtag Cities Work. So again, took all that apply, so we can see how we did even just with our own cross-section of membership.
Okay, what do I have to do to get my numbers to Friday Facts numbers? More sports analogies? Is that what it's going to take?
Yeah, give the people what they want.
Shoot. All right, it's late at night when I'm doing these. I can't, it doesn't. All right.
Perfect.
We'll
Okay,
brush
so
up on sports trivia this summer, so I'm ready to go.
done and done. I'll be happy to help. Okay, then last question is question number 4. Did your city or did you personally share any of the videos or our stories on either your personal social media channels or in your city's communication channels? So this isn't bad for our first go around with this sort of communications effort. That almost half, 41%, well, okay, now 39, but still a sizable number did in our first crack at doing this type of communication effort. When we talk about the League Army, and you heard Rachel reference earlier about the collective strength, really the strength of the League is you, the membership. And so it's our objective to give you tools that then you can share with legislators that will help not just your city, but all cities as you strive to provide the services and infrastructure that your residents expect and strive to plan for population growth. So thank you for that information. That's helpful to us and it's helpful to the board as we talk about next steps on the communication side.
So let's move on to our second big topic for you today, water. This really is another great example of how work over the interim can pay off during the session. So last session, we were faced with a few water bills that would have been detrimental or even devastating to some of our cities. We, last year, with a coalition of others, were able to send those bills to interim study this past year, and Team ULCT, led by our John Hiskey on our staff, engaged all summer long on 4 different study groups to make sure that the consensus legislation that was being drafted by those consensus groups worked for all of our cities and towns. So here's a quick slide of all of the extended family on Team ULCT who participated in these study groups. Mark Aquaman Strafford from Ogden, really, that's what we're going to call him from now on, right?
Yep.
I hope he's going to like
I hope
that.
that's okay with you.
Thumbs up if Mark's going to like that.
Yeah, is Mark going to be okay with us calling him Aquaman? Okay, Mark Johnson's nodding, so that works. He's the boss. Perfect.
He's the boss. So thanks to all of these individuals who helped so much over last interim and then throughout the session to shepherd these bills to completion. Just to mention these bills and what they may mean to you. So HJR 1 and HB 31 both established this idea of a designated water service area, which could be inside your city, it could be also outside of your city. So if approved by the voters, HJR 1, if HJR 1 is approved by the voters, HB 31 will go into effect in 2020. And what must a city do if the statutory accompaniment to the constitutional amendment goes into effect? First, you need to provide a map of your DWSA to the state engineer. You then need to adopt by ordinance the area included inside your DWSA, set reasonable rates by ordinance, and then equally apply protections to ratepayers that are both inside and outside your service district. I am sure that most of you are already doing this protocol in terms of transparency and setting reasonable rates. There were concerns about due process and providing equal access to a city council who's considering setting rates for both people inside the jurisdiction and outside this jurisdiction. And so this is intended to clarify what your responsibilities are for setting those rates for both kinds of customers. SB 17 deals with extraterritorial watershed protection. Under SB 17, again, this is really a transparency effort of if your city controls any kind of watershed that's outside of your jurisdiction, you need to undergo certain public notice and a hearing and adopt an ordinance and enter into an interlocal if you're working with other jurisdictions that are outside of your county and outside of your jurisdiction. So there's some additional requirements for cities of the first class also under SB 17. The next bill I want to mention here under the water category is secondary water metering. This is SB 52 from this last year. And this bill really started out as a state mandate on cities to install meters on all pressurized water users, all residential and industrial and institutional secondary water users. So where did this end up? It ended up with a requirement that new users will have to be metered by April 2020. You'll have to start metering new systems. And then in order to collect data and also get you thinking about how you may need to meter other users, a city is required to develop and submit a plan for metering existing secondary water users. So those are the requirements now. It asks you to take into account, what it would cost, how you would implement meters in different stages on those existing users. So that plan will be due in December of 2019.
And we see these plans as a really good tool for us as your advocates to better understand what you're already doing in your communities to conserve water so that we can proactively defend your ability to make those decisions at a local level. Can we do questions afterwards, just because if we're going to be at the registration desk everywhere, and that's a key thing here. We want to make sure throughout the conference, if you have any questions about any of the bills, even the ones we're not talking about, just come up to us and we can chat about them. This is the last major one we wanted to recap here, and House Bill 119 was the culmination of a 2.5-year process to modernize the local initiatives and referendums law. Here are the things you need to know. First, as of May 14th, there will be the opportunity for you to draw maps in your city, if you're a city above 10,000, to have geographic diversity for signature gathering purposes. So let me tell you what this means on the ground. If I'm a signature gatherer and I walk into Brigham City, since you guys are sitting in front of me, I walk into Brigham City with my 4 colleagues and say we want to refer X decision that the Brigham City Council made. After May 14th, I would have to reach the signature threshold in 75% of the voter participation areas. If you are a city between 10,000 and 65,000, which Brigham City is, you will have to draw 4 voter participation areas, and then the threshold must be met in 3 of them. That's the 75%. If you're a city above 65,000, then you have to draw a map with 8 voter participation areas, and then the signature gatherers have to reach that threshold in 6 of the 8. What this does is it parallels the process for state referendums and state initiatives, which have a geographic diversity requirement for signature gathering purposes. Now, let's say you are a city like Salt Lake City, or even better, my hometown of Murray. So let's do that. If Murray City has 5 council districts. They don't elect their council at large, they elect them individually. So they're different districts. In the case of Murray, with 5 districts, that 75% threshold would just be met by 4 of the 5 council districts. So Murray does not have to draw voter participation area maps. Ditto with cities like a Provo or an Ogden that are hybrid cities that are some districts and some at large. But if your city is all at large, then you do need, by the end of the year, to draw these voter participation area maps working with your county clerks. And we've been working closely with them, and we'll have some aids for you in May so you can start doing that. If you are a city under 10,000, you do not have geographic diversity requirements. This was a big deal for our board of directors. They did not want cities below 10,000 to have geographic diversity. They wanted it for the larger cities. So instead, what we were successful at doing was increasing the thresholds for signature gathering purposes by 5 percentage points from what it currently is in the code. So depending on what size of community you are, this bill applies to you differently on what you need to do on the map side. The second key component, so the geographic diversity signature thresholds are one and the same, is the due process piece. And this was a big deal because a couple of our friends and colleagues have had allegations levied against them, and there's no due process in the code for violating the existing law on how a city can communicate with residents. And so we have fixed the due process language in the code so that what happened to our friends in Orem and Provo will never happen again. The third piece is the communication language. This is critical. This is a game changer for you. Currently in state law, it feels like you got handcuffs once 5 petitioners come into Brigham City Hall and say, we're going to refer this decision. And that's because the rule says you may not use public funds to influence a ballot proposition. What this bill does, again starting May 14th, is it lists different exceptions to that rule. So one exception, for example, is the fact that you can now, as a city staffer or an elected official, directly reply to a question via email. Because the formula said you can't use public email. Now, if Mayor Vincent gets an email from a constituent saying, hey, I hear about this referendum, can you tell me more about it? You can respond without violating that banner rule of you can't use public funds or public email. So that's one example. Another example is that you as cities can actually now go back and gather all of the information that helped you make your decision that is ultimately being referred. So let's say it was a 9-month process for whatever the decision was in Brigham City. Now under this bill, staff can go assemble all of those materials that influence the decision of the council so that the elected officials can explain why they voted the way they voted. And you can gather all that information, and as long as you provide equal access to a website for the petitioners, so in this case it would be me and my 4 friends, you can put both links on the city website or the utility bill or the other ways you communicate with Brigham City residents. That way there's more information available to residents when they're considering signing a petition or ultimately voting in November, because the city is able to explain why the city elected officials voted the way they voted. I realize I'm keeping this at a pretty high level because it gets nuanced really quickly, but we're happy to be a resource for you, and we'll be doing the in-depth presentation to the Municipal Attorneys Association. But if you have any questions about this, feel free to grab us, send us an email, because come May 14th, these new communication rules come into effect, and we think it'll be an enormous step forward for you to be able to communicate with your residents. I mentioned that it was a 2-year effort. And we had an internal work group, and you can see the names on the screen behind me, ranging from city clerks and recorders to elected officials, including the late Mayor Taylor, who helped us create the framework for what the bill should look like. We then took that framework of the bill to the League Board of Directors, and the League Board said this is a major priority, and then we were able to get it across the finish line. And I want to thank Representative Brad Diehl for working with us throughout that 2.5-year process to get a bill to where we think is a good place, both for residents who are filing petitions to refer items, as well as for local government.
And we should mention that starting next week, we're going to be doing roving training around the state in conjunction with the Lieutenant Governor's office to talk about this bill, the referendum bill, and also other bills that affect elections. So more information there. So like we said, we promised we wouldn't talk about all 362 bills or even close to that. But as I mentioned, the quick guide is already up on our website, which categorizes all bills and tells you what bills need action from your city right away or within the short term. And then our full wrap-up should be out hopefully tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. So in our last 10 minutes, we want to just quickly highlight what's coming next. And we'll be going into more detail about this in our caucus meetings. The first thing is I want to applaud the League Board of Directors for over the last year as we've been talking through repackaging local control. These are screenshots from the legislative guide that we shared with every legislator during the session. And we are engaging with legislators through a three-pillared process. First, respect. We want the legislature to respect us as local government, and we respect the role of the state legislature. Collaboration. We're all working toward the same goal. We're all trying to make a difference for the residents of the state of Utah. The third pillar is the outcomes, which is that very thing, of making a difference. So everything that we publish, everything we do is really coming through these 3 pillars of communication, including the hashtag cities work. We also have our policy prism that we evaluate every bill through, and that's the 5 questions we ask of every bill. And really one of the critical questions is this bill a one-size-fits-all approach? If it is, then it's likely the League's going to oppose it. So we've got these principles that we review legislation by that all comes out of the pillars that the League Board has set forth.
A couple other things we want to mention in terms of really being proactive over the interim as we launch into telling you what we're about to do this interim. These are bills up here that are league-driven or city-driven that we were able to push through this session. And they're not all big problems that affect every city. For example, passing HB 425, which clarifies whether a city needs penal bonds and what local officials really need in your city in terms of theft, crime insurance, or penal bonds. That is affecting a lot of cities right now with grammar requests that many of you have been getting. Small city town elections, HB 272, really only impacts, I think, 10 cities, 10 small cities and their elections process. But that was a problem that was presented to us as something that needed to be fixed, and we were able to work this session to get that in a bill and get that fixed. Resort community taxes in the TRT amendments, same thing. So small communities that are impacted, that come to us with a problem, that we're then able to work with the legislator and get fixed.
In fact, House Bill 266 TRT amendments, the conversation about that bill started right out here in the foyer last year when Mayor Smith of Springdale approached me and said, we've got this issue up in the Zion Canyon communities, can you help us with it? And a year later, it's now been fixed. So the point is, as issues arise in your community, please use us as a resource, make sure we're involved, because the strength of the league is the membership. And so instead of Springdale and Rockville trying to pass HB 266 on their own, it was the league saying, here's an issue that affects these two communities, let's get it across the finish line. Mm-hmm. Speaking of the finish line, the legislative session starts in only 277 days, and here are the big issues that are already on the agenda. Tax reform, economic development. I'm going to touch on those two briefly. These will be caucus topics. We sent out the caucus survey before the conference, so we'll go into detail about what happened in the tax reform discussions during the session. But more importantly, we want to have a two-way dialogue with you in your caucuses of commonality to talk about where we go from here on tax reform. Economic development will be a caucus topic in one of the caucuses. But we expect a microscope on economic development efforts around the state, and we're going to be working closely with our economic development directors on that one.
Mm-hmm. With the last few you see up there, public safety and retirement, water conservation, land use task force, and revenue and licensing, those are the other big topics that we'll be working on this summer. The land use task force, as you know, we convene each year. This year, the topics that we'll be delving into range from gravel pits to building inspection. So we've got things on tap, also with stormwater development and things like that. So stay tuned for those big topics this session.
We'll keep you posted via Friday Facts, but please, if you see any of these topics or any other topics, please engage with us. Let us know what is of concern in your community so we can work on it. So that then leads to how you can help us and how you can help the organization over the next 36 hours or so. Look at your badge. Okay, you should all on your badge have two things. You should have an area and you should have a caucus. Now the areas that the league is divided per our Constitution into 8 regions. And so the color of your badge reflects the color of your region. So I've got Tooele here sitting in the front, and I see they have a green. So when you're walking around, you can see that Jewel, you know that Jewel is from your region because you guys are neighbors. But like Russell, who's sitting here in front of you from Salt Lake City, you guys are in the same region. You both have a green ribbon. And so it's in part to help you kind of make connections, and then you can see the ribbons of board members, and you can say, oh, that board member, like Jewel, is from my region. I'm going to go up and chat with her and make sure she knows what's going on in our community so she can report it back to the board and to league staff. On the caucus side, there are 5 caucuses that we created a year ago where we've divided the membership into communities of commonality. And that's based on everything from population growth to budget size and other things. So we group you together so that we can have a dialogue that's more nuanced about what matters in your specific communities. Our objective in the caucus discussions over the next day and a half is to lay the framework for potential league resolutions in September that you would endorse, that then gives us our marching orders as the policy platform for local government in the state. We also plan over the next few weeks to put together a tax policy principle guide to share with the legislature as the tax task force gets underway and is talking about tax reform. And the caucuses are also a chance to share best practices. If your city, like Salt Lake City, is very aggressive in trying to address affordable housing, well, share that with the other members of your caucus, both in those caucus meetings and in future caucus meetings.
And we want to tell you that today is the first caucus meeting of the interim, but we're actually planning something pretty exciting, I think, over the summer, where in lieu of LPC between now and our annual convention in September, we'll meet as caucuses on interim day on the Hill. So that will give us more of a chance to do a deep dive into the issues that really matter to your caucus, to your region, and to network with legislators and others to take our caucuses, to that next step and give you more of an opportunity to work together. As soon as the interim schedule is out, we'll get those scheduled and we'll get you more details.
We think it'll be a great opportunity, though, in lieu of the normal LPCs during the summer, to facilitate that more nuanced discussion.
Should be fun.
Yeah, and hopefully if there's one thing you take away from that is that you've heard me say it before, the strength of the league is the membership. And so we need information from you and engagement from you. And one way you can do that is helping us on the data and the research side. So you will get requests from us like you did last year on water, like you did last year on housing, so that we have information from you so that we can be better advocates for you going forward. A year ago on this stage, we told you water and housing are going to be huge this interim, plan on legislation next year. That's what happened. But we are in a much better position to advocate for you because of your engagement during the off season. We've also been working with external partners. One of those external partners is Y2 Analytics. You may recall the fantastic survey that they did for us and the Housing Gap Coalition during the summer about population growth and housing and public perceptions about growth. So we'll be working with them more this year. They're going to be one of our gold level sponsors. And in a moment, they'll come up and actually give you a sneak peek about emergency preparedness to set up our keynote speaker, Brock Long. So as we are asking you for information, please share it with us so that we can be better advocates for you at the Capitol. And that really leads to the final expression of gratitude, because when Rachel was giving you the report card about how the league did at the Capitol this year, that wasn't just about the two of us. It wasn't about Roger Tu and John Hiskey and Carson Eilers and Rebecca Ward and Wayne Bradshaw and the entire league staff. Personally, I'm very grateful for all the fantastic efforts and the long hours that our staff puts in, and I'm proud to work with them on a daily basis. The thank you, though, goes beyond that. It really goes to you, our membership, to the board of directors, the General League Army, and what we refer to as our extended family on the Hill. And the extended family on the Hill are the elected officials, the city managers, the city attorneys, who join us whenever they can at the Capitol to lobby on behalf of all cities. So it's not just, say, Gary Crane lobbying for Layton City. It's Gary Crane working with the league on behalf of all cities, even though he's the city attorney of Layton. And we could give you the long list of all of them, ranging from Mark Johnson of Ogden to Lynn Pace of Salt Lake City. And I mean, we could just go down the line. But we want to just express our appreciation to that extended family and make sure that you know that extended family is up there advocating on your behalf. When Rachel asked you the question of how often do you interact with your legislators, there's no time like the present. We appreciate what you did during the session, but now is your opportunity to have those discussions more in depth with your legislator. And you can do it in easy ways. Invite them to the 4th of July rodeo. Invite them to come to a council meeting. Invite them to a police ride-along. Think through your city and say, what big project is happening in our city? Maybe you're opening a new sewage treatment facility. Whatever it is, think about how can we use this to facilitate a dialogue with legislators. When we have you come up to the Capitol on interim day for caucus meetings, we'll do our best to try to facilitate that dialogue as well. Together we're greater than we are individually. As I mentioned, it's a great honor to work with Rachel and the rest of the league staff, and it's a great privilege for all of us to represent you. The strength of the league is the membership. Government closest to people governs best. And we appreciate your support of the organization, and we appreciate you joining us here in sunny St. George. Thanks, everyone.